Before we begin, make sure that you're subscribed to this YouTube channel. A lot of people who think that they're subscribed look to find out that they're not. Make sure you hit the bell so you can get your notifications. And if you're not already subscribed, you need to be. The black media is not supposed to be some once every blue moon thing for you. It's supposed to be part of your regular routine, just as black empowerment is supposed to be your lifestyle. Now, that said, a little witticism that's been kicked around for several years now has come back to prominence in the last few days. Never let a good crisis go to waste. By the way, some of you have been attributing that quote to Rahm Emanuel as if he was the one who invented it. He didn't. I believe Condoleezza Rice said it during the Bush years. She wasn't the one who invented it either. It's an old saying from political circles in the United States, but that phrase does not originate with Rahm Emanuel. But the truth that it speaks to is valid nonetheless. The white supremacist powers that be, they created this problem. And now they're going to give you a solution to the problem that didn't exist until they invented it. Yes, indeed, this is the Hegelian dialectic being played out word by word and line by line. This is supposed to be the moving of the goalposts. Social engineering by blunt force trauma. During times of crisis, people are afraid. And when people are afraid, they stop asking questions about anything. You see, a frightened people are also a distracted people too. When the masses are too occupied with keeping themselves alive, why, you can get away with anything because nobody's looking. They've got bigger fish to fry, bigger things to deal with. Donald Trump claims he's a wartime president, this from a man who's never been near a battlefield and wouldn't go if you tried to send him. But that's not to say he doesn't know the latitude that he can potentially gain by making an absurd claim such as, "We're at war." Politicians have known since the time of the Romans that during a war or during some sort of national emergency, you can easily pass legislation that ordinarily would never pass, that you wouldn't even attempt it under normal circumstances because you'd be too scared of the political backlash during normal times. Now, many people have tried to give some sort of comparison, and their attempts have largely been lacking. Some people have said the last time a situation like this was September 11th. Nah, nice try, but not even close. The last time a situation like this was World War II. Nice try, but not close. The Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression is in the ballpark. That was definitely a national emergency because it was on American soil, and it affected everyone in the United States. Now, the Great Depression would be a much more appropriate comparison. But September 11th does have an interesting little episode within it, actually before it, that gives you some idea that the powers that be were not just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. This is the kind of thing that they wait for. You see, the Project for a New American Century, a bunch of neocons, they had their little paper that they wrote up, and one of the things that they had written was that in order to get the U.S. to undertake the policies that the neocons want, well, basically there was no argument they felt could be made during normal circumstances. No argument was going to be enough to persuade the American people, not for the kind of changes they wanted to implement. So what they said was that what would be needed would be a, quote, Pearl Harbor type event. What they meant was something that affected the American people personally, something that traumatized and scared them. After that, people would be willing to do whatever you wanted. See, that's the thing that tyrants, dictators, and abusers have always known about trauma. Trauma has always been a way to open someone's mind, not open it in the sense of make the person more knowledgeable, but open-minded in the sense that now they are vulnerable and open to whatever it is you want them to do. When you traumatize someone, that is an effective means by which to induce an instantaneous suggestive state. You want to put somebody into a suggestive mind state, traumatize them. Don't just hurt them, inflict some trauma. That'll make them a lot more open-minded to whatever it is that you intend to suggest. Following the September 11th attacks, the neoconservatives used that 9/11 event as an opportunity to push for a number of rules that they had been trying and failing to get passed since the Nixon administration. After the 2008 economic crash, big corporations, especially Big Pharma, worked hand in hand with Obama to push for a windfall on the public dime under the lie that this would make health care affordable, when all it really did was demand that everyone buy a product that most people couldn't afford anyway. None of the banks got punished. But what did happen was they were able to basically induce shock and trance on people, and it worked. After the 2008 crash, people were concerned that this was going to be the end of America, the second Great Depression. So the powers that be pretended to address America's cardinal sin, racism, the crime against the slaves, which Obama had nothing to do with, by the way. They shocked the nation. Wow, there's going to be a solution coming from an unlikely source, a very eloquent black bootlick. And then what happened was, in return for not having a second Great Depression, the very corporate forces who ripped off the country and brought about the economic calamity, they were allowed to just saunter off into the sunset. In fact, better than that. On the public dime, these guys were actually made richer than they were before the 2008 crash. They didn't even miss a single bonus. Not a single annual bonus was missed. See, that's the power of traumatizing people. But politicians aren't the only ones who know the value of using the distraction and fear that a crisis causes in order to get away with murder. Corporations in particular are very adept at this tactic. Earlier today on Twitter, I posted about how a number of corporate concerns, mostly distributors and manufacturers, were writing a letter to the Trump administration and various state governments telling them, you got to relax all these regulations and rules. Oh, well, the reason that the store's shelves are empty is because of panic buying, sure, but that's only a small part of the problem. Why we could fill those shelves today, but if only these regulations, you see. Well, that's what you call 3 lies for every half-truth. The letter that these cabals have sent references things that they know have absolutely nothing to do with them. For example, they claim that the CDC bans gatherings of 50 people or more. They claim that that's one of the reasons. Well, we can't get goods to the market because the CDC bans gatherings of 50 people or more, and we're not sure if delivering our products would violate that ban. They then go on to say that decisions to follow CDC guidance are made at the state and local level. Well, which one is it? First of all, that has nothing to do with regular patrons and events such as concerts, etc. When you go into the freaking store, that's not a gathering of 50 people or more. They know that has nothing to do with them because they're not part of a gathering. They are at most deliverymen passing through. Understand, this is white-splaining at its finest. Any lie will do for the white supremacists. White supremacy loves to play dumb. It's their favorite strategy. Either for dodging an issue that they're terrified to be pinned down on, or in order to take up a passive-aggressive stance for something that they're trying to strong-arm you into doing. And that's what's happening here. These clowns are pretending that, it's the CDC, you see. Well, that has something to do with us. That's one of the lies that they like to do. They're always going to try to claim that something pertains to them when it doesn't, or vice versa, that something has nothing to do with them when it's directly aimed at them. Kind of reminds me of Bernie the bigot Sanders pretending not to know what reparations meant. And when he was bluntly told what it meant, when he was cornered on the issue, only then did he finally say no. And he gave an unambiguous no, an unqualified no. He didn't say, well, now that I know the reparations means money, I need to look into it. I need to see if the country can afford it. For a man who was so clueless as to what reparations meant, for a man who didn't have a clue what it meant, for a man who claimed that it could take a lot of forms. Reparations can be a lot of things. For a man who tried to palm himself off as being so flexible on reparations, the moment someone told him what it was, he immediately said no, and it was an unqualified no. Now, what politician ever gives a flat out answer to anything? Seriously. When's the last time you had a politician who gave a straightforward yes or no answer to whether or not they were in favor of something? They never do that. You ask them about abortion. Even the most hardcore right winger doesn't say no under any circumstances. He goes, well, to save the life of the mother, or first trimester, or in the case of rape or incest, there's always qualifications. You ask the liberals about whether or not they're in favor of the death penalty. Well, it depends. If you got some mass murder, I wouldn't want to execute every Tom, Dick, and Harry, but under certain circumstances, etc., etc. They never just give a flat out no, but Bernie the bigot did to reparations. You see, for things the politicians are in favor of, they know that it will offend someone. Some constituency is not going to like whatever stance that they take on the issue. So politicians, as a matter of course, they use a lot of verbal embroidery. And that way they give themselves cover for when they have to explain to each one of their constituencies why they took the position that they did. When you got to explain, when you take one position, you're going to offend someone else. So you got to have some language there that makes it where you can gild the lily and say, well, you see, it's not as bad as all that. I know what I said was that stop and frisk was an excellent policy and we need more of it. But what I was really talking about was I was talking about those criminal blacks, and the preachers, they wanted me to do it. Notice how Bloomberg and Bill Clinton's rhetoric dovetails nicely. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But my point is, politicians always give qualified answers because that's how they insulate themselves from criticism. That's how they deflect the people who point at them and say, we can't vote for you because you took this position. And you get to say, well, truth be told, when you look at it, I did give myself an out. Every politician gives themselves an out, but Bernie didn't. He didn't give a damn if black people didn't like his answer on reparations. He wanted to make it clear he left no room to be flexible on that one. Oh, he wasn't going to be hedging his bets on that at all. It was flat out no. But I digress. But since some of you like to pick and choose when you want to be skeptical about white supremacy, particularly corporations, which happen to be part of the administrative arm of white supremacy, the government and the corporations are practically one and the same. That's why I call them both the administrative arm of white supremacy. That's what they do. I'm sure some of you will play dumb, or maybe you're not playing, and you'll try to be doubtful that this many companies can get on the same page for the sake of undermining the government, or at least attempting to try to attack the public for the sake of getting some sort of policy that they want. Oh, Professor Truth, you reaching. And you're slow. The problem is Negroes love to wax poetic about history, but they don't want to actually learn a dang thing about it. And next thing you know, they'll be saying, oh, that's brother, you reaching. Yeah, because corporations, it's not like they've done anything like this before, right? Right? Except they have. Smedley Butler, you guys remember him, the famous general and the most respected military man in the U.S. at that time. He wrote his classic book, War is a Racket, and he also testified before Congress that he was approached by individuals on behalf of some of the wealthiest interests on Wall Street who wanted former General Butler to lead a coup d'etat against President Roosevelt. This little incident, you can look it up online. It's come to be known as the business plot. Some of the U.S.'s biggest corporations were angry with Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the policies that he was enacting because they felt that it was going to cut into their profits, or worse, it was going to benefit working class white people. Let's be all the way real about that. These mega rich companies and the white men who ran them, they saw themselves as America's royalty. And the economy, well, that was their personal property. As far as they were concerned, it's not the customers and the employees who make the economy. It's the rich guys who sit around their pool with their mistresses. They're the ones who make the economy. Why, the economy wouldn't exist without them. So the economy's their personal property, and they ought to own it lock, stock, and barrel. As they saw it, the president, like the Congress, was to be an obedient servant. The president was supposed to be nothing more than a rubber stamp certifying whatever his corporate overseers told him to do. And when Roosevelt chose to go in a different direction, these plutocrats went into meltdown. Corporations such as DuPont and Colgate, along with wealthy financiers, including Prescott Bush, were implicated in the plot. These were the same corporations, by the way, who Teddy Roosevelt 35 years earlier had to go after for monopolizing the economy, their so-called trusts, and buying politicians wholesale. So all this pretending not to understand what CDC rules are, as if those rules apply to them in this case, this is just the industry sending the message that this is a work stoppage at the corporate level. That's part of the reason why you see the politicians not saying anything about it, because what do you say to something like this? You can't admit that, whoops, we got some of the corporations who we're depending on in this crisis. We're telling people to stay home except to go to the grocery store and get food, except these guys have decided, well, now you're having to come to us on a national level. See, this ain't some hurricane. This isn't a tornado. This isn't some localized disaster like a terrorist attack in Midtown Manhattan. This isn't a localized disaster like Katrina or even a regional one. This one is national, sea to shining sea. So as far as these corporations are concerned, you got everybody from the food companies to the pharmaceutical companies to the cleaning companies, the hygienic companies. We're talking about billion-dollar interests, each and every one of them. Every one of them are billion-dollar corporations. And there are things that they've been wanting for the longest time, but as far as they were concerned, they didn't have leverage. Now they feel as if they do. What you are seeing is the corporate equivalent of a work stoppage. I'm at a loss to figure out what the exact word would be. See, when the employees decide they're going to put down their tools and sit on their hands, that's a work stoppage. In this case, the work hasn't stopped. But it's a goods stoppage. It's a product stoppage. When they claim that it's all the state and local governments who determine what CDC compliance that they're going to give, that totally negates the need to get federal approval, doesn't it? And if they get federal approval, then these corporations don't need to ask the state's permission. See, they're so busy trying to tell some lie. What they're trying to do is basically say, well, we're confused. Well, we don't understand. And that's going to be their talking point to hide behind. But they're not alone. See, what Trump and these corporations understand is that wartime legislative changes tend to be permanent legislative changes. War has always been an expedient means by which interested parties can get desirable legislation, desirable for them legislation, on the books. And once that legislation's on the books, all of a sudden the Congress becomes helpless to do anything about it, and presidents were not going to speak against it. For example, the Defense Production Act that Donald Trump's been talking about using the last few days, that was a wartime law passed by the Congress in 1950. And why did Congress pass that law? It was in response to the Korean War. That's why they passed it. They didn't even pass something like that in response to World War II, when something of that nature would have made sense. They passed it in response to the Korean War. And yet here we are 70 years later, and that law is still on the books. Ain't been used in 70 years. You would think by now the country would have grown, evolved, and become sophisticated enough where such legislation wouldn't even be necessary, especially because the corporations get to have their way on everything, and yet it's still on the books. See, that's the power of being able to call upon a crisis to reshape public policy. And this crisis is being used by a lot of interested parties to leverage things that they could never get otherwise. These companies are billion-dollar titans, yet they refuse to give their employees a decent wage or humane working conditions. They gouge customers. They sell defective, if not downright dangerous products, and then they demand the government write laws to make them immune from prosecution. Are we seriously going to believe these guys when they claim that their sudden paralysis and their sudden inability to get goods to the hospitals or to the stores is because they're scared someone's going to accuse them of violating a gathering ban? Really? Are they suddenly concerned about not overworking their drivers? Is anyone here so stupid as to believe that these companies care about their employees? Well, it seems some of you might be. Because you know who we don't hear from in all of this? The truckers. We have not heard from the truckers themselves. Oh, the white media has no problem giving as much online and broadcast air as possible to these companies, these manufacturers and distributors, even the retailers, so they can all claim that they're helpless. Oh, our hands are tied. Well, it's the customer's fault. It's government regulation's fault. I wonder what the truckers would say if anyone actually talked to them, because they're the ones in the best position to be, as the middlemen, they're in the best position to know whether or not the manufacturers are truly slowing down the goods getting to market. They're in the best position to know, and yet they're the ones we're not hearing from, or rather that we're not allowed to hear from. All we hear from are the white media and from corporate mouthpieces who claim to be supply chain experts. But nonetheless, that's not to say that the truckers have had nothing to say. Now, the Wall Street Journal, yes, I know, Rupert Murdoch's little yellow rag. Bear with me. The Wall Street Journal, in what is clearly a bit of accidental journalism, they actually mention things from the truckers' point of view. And what a surprise! You immediately hear that it's not government regulations, but the stores and suppliers themselves who are keeping the products from reaching the public. According to the journal, quote, some customers, we're talking about the stores here, that means the big ones, Walmart, Target, Kroger's, Costco, etc. Some customers are asking drivers to stay in their trucks or switch from paper to electronic methods to document pickups. This is according to trucking companies and freight brokers. The journal went on to say some trucking companies said their drivers are facing new restrictions at receiving docks if they have been in states considered coronavirus hot zones. Now, considering that the virus is in all 50 states, a term like hot zone has very little meaning. But to continue, one trucking company owner said that, quote, some of the shippers and receivers are asking drivers to sign affidavits that they are not sick. Shippers means manufacturers and receivers meaning stores. Notice that at this point, at no point in the story is the government or limitations on the hours that a trucker can be made to drive come into play. At no point is that mentioned because that's not part of the issue here. That's not what's slowing things down. This is what's happening in terms of products not reaching the stores. And that's from the Wall Street Journal. So when we hear from the truckers, what they're saying is these retailers are giving us a hard time. They're trying to micromanage where we can go. You got somebody in Pennsylvania saying, we're not going to accept any cargo from you if you came from New York. If your truck passed through New York. It would be one thing if my cargo was a whole bunch of infected patients. Well, the fact you passed through New York, that's too much for us. That's one of the games that Pennsylvania was playing. Well, I guess that old saying is true. Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh in the west, Philadelphia in the east, and Alabama in between. But that's not the only example. I came across a little article from a couple of years ago dealing with Walmart, the world's biggest retailer. Walmart decided to adopt a rather interesting policy regarding their suppliers. You see, Walmart fines its suppliers. That's right, they issue a fine to other businesses for shipments that come in late, because that leaves the most valuable space in retail open and hence not generating income. So that's why Walmart fines them, at least for that. If your shipment comes in late, they got to fine you. Because as far as they're concerned, that's sales that they're missing out on and you're costing them money. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, if I were a supplier for Walmart, all you got to do is make it a point to have your products arrive early ahead of time, and then Walmart will be happy, right? Wrong. Walmart also fines its suppliers whenever their shipments show up early. Products must arrive exactly on their arrive by date, not after and not even before. Because as far as Walmart's concerned, early shipments creates overstocks. As far as they're concerned, we can't have the product show up early because, well, now we got too much of it, and space here in our holding area. Space is very precious, by the way. And when Walmart decides to put a fine on a supplier for their product showing up late or early, there's no appeal from Walmart's fines. Hey, gee, tell me something. I thought that fine was just another way of saying tax. Isn't that what the business class always tells us?
But whenever these governments put a fine, if there's a fine for environmental pollution, that's just another word for tax.
Well, great. Doesn't that go for Walmart? Of course, you don't hear the business class talking like that, even though they're the ones made to pay this tax to Walmart. There may be no honor among thieves, but that's not to say that they don't cover for each other. If one of them goes down, they all got to go down because they're all doing the exact same thievery. So, I'm wondering though, will these manufacturers and distributors who whine about wanting relief from government regulators, will they also demand that Walmart give them early arrival fine relief? We need relief from these early arrival fines. Or late arrival fines. If anything, they ought to be up in arms, marshaling their trade association to write some letters to Walmart telling them to lay off the fines and how that's anti-capitalistic. If these manufacturers and shipping companies are so hot and bothered about regulation and they want to write a letter because they want things to change, why don't they write one to Walmart? So you have manufacturers and stores saying people shouldn't buy so much. That's what they're saying instead. When you start looking at the news stories, that's what you're hearing. You start reading online and seeing what do these companies have to say for themselves, that's what they're saying. Well, gee, it's a whole bunch of buying going on. If only people weren't buying so much. Gee, isn't that the opposite of what manufacturers and retailers are supposed to be saying? I thought these guys were capitalists. I thought as far as they were concerned, the biggest problem was that demand was trailing off. I thought that their biggest problem is when people aren't buying. Here they are with basically Christmas in March, and they're complaining about it. And that's especially telling when it's coming from the retailers. For over a decade, we've heard retailers whine and complain nonstop that the internet was putting them out of business. When Amazon announced that it was going to be selling groceries online, you had grocery stores up in arms that this would put them out of business. After all, who would bother to go to their local Costco or Kroger's when you can get your food delivered to your door and probably at a lower price? And now those same retailers are saying that people are buying too much? I could see it differently if the stores gave away product for free, but they're getting paid for all this. They're making money or would be making money hand over fist, but they're complaining about it. This is like Black Friday for them, if Black Friday lasted for a month. They ought to be drooling at the prospect to get the torrent of money that's potentially waiting on them, but they're not. Instead, they're complaining and saying they wish people wouldn't buy so much. This is why people got tired of retailers in the first place. They don't know their business and they don't do it very well. They're not acting like an industry that wants to hold on to the people that they lost to the online sellers. They're not acting like they want to keep Amazon or some other online seller from replacing them. They're acting like it's too much trouble for them to do their jobs, which means it's too much trouble for them to stay in business. These retailers who are trying to show some sort of professional courtesy to these manufacturers, suppliers, and in many cases distributors who are holding things up and deciding to withhold product as a means of trying to force legislative and policy changes that they shouldn't be able to have. These guys who are thinking to themselves, well, one hand washes the other, all that's really happening is they're making it where a lot of people who never even thought about buying online are going to because A, they have no other option in this case, but also it's going to become habit forming for them. When they realize, yeah, these online places actually can get the product to you, that's going to have it where the people who used to say, well, let me drive up the street, it's going to be a matter of, you know what, why bother? They are doing something that is very dangerous, especially for them at this particular point in economic history, which is they are training and conditioning their customers to go to someone else. Isn't it amazing? All these companies who endlessly brag about their manufacturing capacity and how their supply chains are ready for anything. Ain't that what UPS talks about? And a bunch of other companies. We put the steel in the supply chain. Well, if by steel you mean STEAL, yeah, you are a bunch of crooks and thieves. But these guys love to brag about we can help you get a better supply chain, much more efficient, get your goods to the customers and make more profit. Well, we're finding out whether or not these guys actually are able to do that now. The hospitals in particular are finding this out the hard way. Because they weren't ready for success, which is what this would ordinarily be. This would ordinarily be a massive success for them, but white supremacy already has all the money in the world. They've cornered the market on the cash. What white supremacy wants are the things that money cannot buy. And in this case, what they've always wanted is a regulatory environment where they can just throw safety standards out the window. They can use substandard materials or just lie and substitute some other cheaper material altogether to squeeze as much uncompensated labor from their employees as possible and to charge the public a mint for this garbage. In other words, they want to defraud. They want to wreck people's lives and rip off the public with impunity. They can't get all of that right now, but if they can push the lie that in this moment, where the stores are largely empty, and you have a national crisis going on, one that is basically making it where the government is basically saying, go to the grocery stores and buy everything. If they can make it where there are scarce resources at this moment and try to extend that scarcity for as long as possible, and if they can push the lie that their refusal to meet public demand is the fault of the regulations and not their own largely illegal maneuvering, if they can do that successfully, then they're going to be a lot closer to having that kleptocracy that they've been scheming for all these years. Oh, and there still won't be any products on the store shelves afterwards. So you better be very careful about believing any of the propaganda that the white media puts out, especially at this time. You better take everything not with a grain of salt, but with a tablespoon of salt, if you can find it. Because when you read the white media propaganda, you start seeing very strange phrases such as hours of service regulatory relief. Hours of service regulatory relief? They want relief from the federal government's mandated hours of service regulations? That you can't just run the truckers like dogs? You know, when I hear some strange phrase like that, some made-up bit of pablum like that, that sounds like something the Koch brothers would say if the EPA removed all rules regarding air pollution. Regulations of any sort haven't stopped these companies from becoming billion-dollar juggernauts, so it's a bald-faced lie to pretend that all of a sudden it's a problem now. Someone, or rather a number of rich individuals, think that they see an opportunity to force some changes that will be advantageous, but only for them. Hours of service regulatory relief. That doesn't sound like something a trucker would say. How many truckers have you ever heard say, man, these trucking companies, they don't keep us on the road nearly enough. Oh man, they don't have us driving loads nearly enough. I wish I could spend more time on the road. We don't spend nearly enough time on the road. Oh, I don't need to have my time on the road regulated. I don't get to spend enough time on the road. I don't drive enough hours a day. 12 hours a day ain't enough. I need more. How about 18 hours? Have you ever heard a trucker talking like that? Or does that kind of crazy talk sound more like some white corporate chump who's never driven a load a day in his life? The problem isn't the supply chain. It's about trying to undo regulations beneficial to a small handful of corporate interests. I mean, that's one of many things going on here. I harp on that for the most part simply because I think it's important to understand the real reason. When they're telling the truth when they say, oh, there's lots of supply. The problem isn't that there's not enough product. Sure, they can't lie about that. Because if they did, somebody, you better believe the employees would snitch on them. Reporters and regulators will be looking. So they can't lie and say, oh, we just don't have the product. So instead, what they're saying is, well, it's the supply chain. The supply chain is overburdened. But I've already explained to you, the truckers have already said that ain't a problem. The problem happens to be that you're getting jammed up from both sides. Either the manufacturers are sitting here going, can we trust our product to you? You sure you ain't got the coronavirus? Or what happens is they get to the retailers and the retailers do the same things. All this garbage about why we have instead of having a shipment once a week, why we have 2 a day. Someone's lying here. Someone's lying here. And when you still see that the shelves at the stores are empty and getting emptier, the shelves had only a little bit of product and now they're soon going to have none, what you realize is, it's probably not the truckers who are lying. Obviously, this is a corporate power play, a thinly veiled pressure tactic meant to force some major regulatory concessions to be enacted, which these corporations will plan to use long after the coronavirus has become a footnote in the history books. Just like that Defense Production Act, they're going to be demanding it today. And you're going to be thinking, well, it's going to be just some temporary changes. Nah, they intend for this to become part of the permanent landscape, kind of like the repeal of Glass-Steagall. See, Glass-Steagall, they were like, that's something that's got to go. But the problem was you had generations who remember the Great Depression. So they had to wait until the freaking Clinton administration, the 1990s, before they could finally get rid of it. And when they did, you notice that there hasn't been anything done to reverse that. They've had to pretend, what was it, McCain-Feingold or whatever, Dodd-Frank, whatever. I forget how many of these self-serving politicians have acts that are supposed to be beneficial to the public. But the point is they claim that they put something in place that was just as good. No, they didn't. Glass-Steagall's gone and there's been nothing to replace it. Remember when the communications companies were trying to kill net neutrality during the Obama administration? The American people, and truth be told, online tech giants who depend on the internet not costing them any more than it currently does, they rallied. The communications companies were defeated that time, but do you recall what the communication cartel's reaction to this defeat was? Do you recall what they did afterwards? In an unprecedented move, Verizon, reacting like the crybabies they are, posted a reply on their so-called blog. It was a reply written in Morse code. This pathetic, asinine whining came with a headline saying that the FCC had just pushed the telecommunications industry back into the 1930s. I wish I was making that up. Of course, no one's PC or iPhone or tablet disappeared. Verizon certainly didn't stop offering their own crappy service, so what the hell were they lying about? What they were saying was if they couldn't arbitrarily price gouge customers, then they might as well not have any computers. Basically, it's a matter of if we can't screw people over, we might as well not even be in business. This is the attitude of contempt that these corporations have for the public. It's an attitude that they've always had. This isn't new. They have no problem whatsoever attempting to attack the public through denial of service, through denial of goods, whatever they can do. These guys will do anything that it takes in order to get their way. Now, why do I harp on this? Because, as I pointed out with my now classic video, The Truth About Robert Mugabe, the U.S. and its white supremacist allies around the world, their favorite tactic to destabilize governments that they want to overthrow is to attack the target population. And that takes the forms of stopping the flow of goods and services in that country to bring their society to a standstill. That's the form that it takes. The white supremacists then blame the government in question and they tell everybody, well, hey, it's not our fault. We could bring these shortages to an end tomorrow morning if only those pesky politicians would do what we say. This is all their fault. That's what they do. It's what they've always done. Don't you recognize the tactic? See, this is where history comes into play. One of the things that the Greeks understood, because they were, for all their faults, they were students of history. They understood that you better keep the military, that if you're a country, if you're a so-called empire, that depends upon voraciously eating up other countries around the world, you better make sure the military stays way the hell out there. You bring them back, you're going to have a problem on your hands. You're going to wind up with a captive state before you know it. They understood that the same brutal measures that they had been using to steal from their neighbors, the Greeks understood that when the party came to an end, they would at some point have to enact brutal measures against the Greek people themselves to keep them in line. That's what always happens when the party's over. Same thing happened in Rome. Yeah, while you're busy raiding other people's pantries, it seems like you're getting all this stuff for free, but sooner or later, the scam always comes to an end. And when it does, the people are like, well, where's the next batch of goodies? Sorry, ain't no more goodies. Now you got a revolution on your hands. The same tactics that the United States has used to try to strangle other countries for resources in order to get them to do what the U.S. wants, now they're using those tactics right here. This is what they've always done. Strangle the society for resources, put some pain on the public, put the population in a state of deprivation. And what'll happen is they'll get angry, they'll get resentful, and you tell them this is all the government's fault. And you'll have a compliant media that you own because you take out airtime with them and because of the fact that they're as much liars as these manufacturers are. Thieves of a feather flock together. And the media will say, well, it's the government's fault. It's regulation's fault. Okay, well, we're not going to say there's regulation's fault, but we will repeat what these manufacturers and these suppliers and retailers are saying. We'll repeat their lies, and we will not allow anything to the contrary. We'll just repeat that lie, and, well, that'll be that. And as the people get angrier, hopefully they will demand that the politicians give the corporations whatever they want. That's the point. We just ratchet up the pressure on the public, starve them for resources, and they'll say, oh, please give the corporations whatever they want. Anything will be better than this. That's the goal. That's what they're attempting to engineer here. We saw this in Zimbabwe, and we have also seen this exact same strategy used for several years now against Venezuela. Now, for the slow coasts out there, I'm not saying let's put on a cape for Latin America, though it does need to be mentioned that Hugo Chavez himself repeatedly and proudly referred to himself as having African features. He would do that on a frequent basis. And his white opponents in Venezuela, they routinely attacked him for precisely these traits. As far as they were concerned, when Hugo Chavez took power, that was the end of white rule in Venezuela. And the U.S. government felt the same way too. I give Venezuela a certain amount of consideration that I do not give to any other country in Latin America, not even Brazil. The white oligarchs of Venezuela, they knew Chavez had enormous support with the Venezuelan people, and these oligarchs wanted to punish the people for daring to oppose them. You got to see the way the society is run. You have to see the society through the eyes of your oppressor so that you can understand what he's doing and how to defeat him. As far as these companies are concerned, well, under normal circumstances, they don't have any leverage. Sure, they make profit, but they can't really get what they really want, which is control of the society, control of you and me. They don't have any leverage. They simply have a product to sell, but under normal circumstances, there's competition. They can't corner the market, and it's not as if there's scarcity of items. And even if there was, well, under normal circumstances, whenever you have a service gap or you have a supply gap or a goods gap, somebody will step in there. That is, unless you can manufacture a crisis. Then all of a sudden you don't have normal circumstances anymore. Now the products that you have, they're no longer just items that can get you a little bit of profit. Now they can get you something that you never had before, and that is societal leverage. That's how they see it. See, this is the way that these guys talk when they're in their boardrooms. These are the conversations they're having right now that the public is not privy to. I was explaining on Twitter that the deliberate withholding of products from hospitals and stores, this is the main tactic that the white-owned manufacturers in Venezuela have used in order to engineer so-called mass shortages of goods in that country. This is what's been going on in Venezuela for several years now. In Venezuela, these corrupt white elites who own The manufacturing base of the country, these are the ones who Venezuela depends on to produce everything from food to toilet paper to diapers to you name it. And when Hugo Chavez came to power, when the people overthrew and voted out the white ruling class, these corrupt companies stopped the production of specific items such as diapers because young people, particularly young women, they would be affected by this, so you're affecting the mothers. They also stopped production on foodstuffs and, yes, toilet paper. I mean, I hope you notice a particular pattern forming here. You ain't got to take my word for it. There's plenty of articles you can find online from alternative news sources. Alternative simply meaning it's not coming from any of the agenda-setting presses. You're not going to find ABC, NBC, or CBS putting this out there, but you will find plenty of the foreign press talking about it. And you'll also find independent voices out there, alternative press voices, who are speaking about it as well. But this stuff's already been documented. You can go on YouTube and you can find plenty of videos where they explain all this and where they actually have videos from inside Venezuela showing all this going down. You ain't got to take my word for it. All you got to do is take out the time to look it up for yourself. This is what's going on in the U.S. You notice that the policies used abroad are reflecting exactly what's happening here now. There have been hurricanes and natural disasters that affect entire regions of the country every year. That's never been a problem for the supply chain before. Suppliers brag all the time that they can get their products anywhere, anytime. Distributors brag that they are a shipping solutions company. They've had all the opportunity on the planet to whine about regulations before now, but they haven't because they knew that nobody would listen and nobody would care. Because a hurricane, even one that affects more than one state, simply isn't significant enough to cause more than one or two senators to get a few angry phone calls. You withhold goods from Florida or from Louisiana, sure, there'll be one or two senators who get a call, but that ain't going to move the needle. No regulations will change based on that. And besides, there'll be too many organizations from outside these affected areas who can bring goods in. In other words, you can't shut off the supply lines. Not like that. It's just not feasible. What they want is something that will get all of Congress to jump to their tune, something that'll get all the state legislatures to bow down and do what they say. As far as the manufacturers and the distributors are concerned, they will never have a better opportunity than right now to try to force their will onto the public. And speaking of people who are attempting to get away with something, it's not just these companies and corporations. You got the guys in the government, the Trump White House, or as we should go ahead and call them, the Trump crime family. They're scheming how to steal everything. I mean, a bunch of crooks and a bunch of ne'er-do-wells. Donald Trump, of course, this scumbag. I mean, if this guy shakes your hand, you better check your pocket and make sure the wallet's still there. And of course, talk about the right tool for the right job, the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin. I mean, making him Treasury Secretary, that was about as bright a move as making Judas Iscariot into the treasurer for Christ's church. When Jesus knew that he had a crook on his hands with that guy. It's like, man, you better keep your eye on Judas over here. You can't trust him with nothing. But that's what Donald Trump did. He brought in a freaking crook. This corporate con man who had been running a housing scam out in California. Kamala Harris refused to prosecute him for his crimes there. And now, thanks to this crisis, Steve Mnuchin is about to preside over a $1.3 trillion slush fund. In fact, it's probably going to be more than that before it's all over. Steve Mnuchin has been given the ability to preside over this. This crook who has a PhD in thievery. You give him control over that much money? Do you truly think that a few $1 billion isn't going to disappear into his and Donald Trump's pockets? The only thing that Donald Trump knows is the graft. The only thing he knows is the payoff and the bribe. And the only thing that Steve Mnuchin knows is how to embezzle. So you have two crooks who are about to be given control over $1.3 trillion to do with as they wish, and nobody thinks that a few $1 billion is going to disappear. That's probably the reason why they like the fact that the number has to be huge. It has to be huge. The figure has to be huge. Yeah, because when you're talking about $1.3 trillion, well, who's going to miss a few billion here and there? I mean, after all, the only person who could prosecute Steve Mnuchin would be Mike Barr, who I think we can all agree is an empty suit, a good-for-nothing. And considering that his predecessor was Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, that's saying something. So you see, there is a lot of jockeying for position going on right now. Right now, a lot of people are trying to see how they can use this crisis for their own benefit. This is the Hegelian dialectic on a macro level. The politicians aren't the only ones trying to take advantage of this largely manufactured chaos. It's happening across the board. And by the way, while we're on the subject of money getting distributed, let's talk about the proposed $1,200 check that people under $75,000 a year are supposed to be getting. Let's talk about that, because some people who clearly live their lives online, or at least these are some of the undercover EBT crowd, but they always out themselves. As soon as you sit here and talk about giving a couple of extra butter biscuits, or you talk about giving a 3-piece with fries, or if you talk about giving some sort of stimulus check, there's some Negroes who will lose their minds, and all of a sudden, as far as they're concerned, this system ain't so bad. What about that $1,200 check? First of all, for the fools who have been posting on my Twitter timeline that's reparations, man. That's reparations. You sound like every white supremacist who's out there. Reparations is something specifically for black people who came out of slavery. That is reparations. When you give a check to everyone, that ain't no damn reparations. If everyone gets reparations, no one gets reparations, stupid. But there are some Negroes, they try to find a way to put a pretty face on what they know to basically be a con game. Long as they think that they're getting some crumbs out of it, they'll make excuses for anything white supremacy does. White supremacy doesn't even have to give them equal treatment. All white supremacy has to do is flick a couple of crumbs their way, and as far as they're concerned, they start panting like a dog. No, that $1,200 check, it's not reparations, though it does say a lot that so many Negroes are drooling for it and trying to turn it into something that it's not. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. Money is money, but what I am saying is don't you dare try to say that giving every person in America, every racist, every anti-black bigot, a check, somehow that's supposed to be the same as economically leveling the playing field for the people who built this country. Don't you try to equate the two, because they're not the same. Now, there is something that I think needs to be said about this, and I'm probably going to make myself very unpopular, but as Jason Black likes to say, damn you, there's something that I think needs to be said. And I know that some of you, because look, a lot of people are in different situations. Stuff happens. I get that. But as far as the $1,200 check goes, I do think, and for those who, the hood rat contingent, the EBT crowd who have no business being here, but you like to consider yourselves to be highbrow hood rats, you like to consider yourselves to be intellectual dusty dudes, for you, I have no sympathy and absolutely no consideration for you. You're part of the problem, and we'll be better off when we don't have to deal with you anymore. But for the people who, for whatever reason, may be in a situation where they're looking and going, well, this $1,200 check, this is probably the only thing I'm getting right now. Let me tell you something. Chronically broke Negroes, they're not going to take us anywhere. And black folks who always seem to find themselves being up against it every single month, and every month your pockets are turned out, and your freaking bank account is always on E. You can never seem to ever get anything in it. You can't seem to save anything. You could be given a check for $1 million. It'll flow through your fingers like water. Negroes have to show that they're able to actually hold on to what it is that they acquire. Those are the kind of black folks that we need around. The EBT crowd, or regardless of the circumstances, the people they're always on E. I'm not sure that black folks like that are cut out for black empowerment. And if that's the way that you've been doing things, if those are the circumstances that you seem to perpetually find yourself in, you might want to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask why that is. Because those are kind of Negroes who will gladly let white supremacy bribe them with their own money. Where's my reparations check? Well, here's $1,200, and you Negroes should be happy with that. This is your reparations, pal. And then you'll come and tell me, this reparations. Shut the hell up. You see, white supremacy is very careful. It's very clever. It understands when it's dealing with fools, pawns who are ripe for a fall. White supremacy is very sophisticated, despite some people's denials. It understands that a black man whose bank account is not on E, Negroes who know how to save money, black people who know how to actually put away more than they spend to make sure that they have something for a rainy day, just in case white supremacy decides, hey, this might be a good time to reorganize the entire society through a collective national trauma. We're going to declare that all the businesses are closed because we know that'll put most of you bastards on your knees immediately. White supremacy, we've been saying for over a decade now that you better not let your bank account be on E because you never know when white supremacy is going to cut you off. And you're like, oh, well, if they cut off my job at the plant, I'll go find another job at the plant or the unemployment. Oh, I'm going to find me something. Yeah, what if they cut all of them off? Then what? No, how they going to do that? Well, you just saw how they did it. And you notice that all the states are complying. Nobody is revolting. Nobody's saying, well, hey, look, sorry, but we'll take our chances. Nobody's saying that. They're all falling in lockstep. Left wing, right wing, no wing, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Socialist, all of them doing it. Don't matter if you're a Republican, Democrat, Conservative, Liberal, Libertarian, Communist, Socialist, or Martian. They're all going along with it. I put out my classic video, We're All Detroiters, now over a decade ago, explaining that economics would be the means by which the white supremacists would bring Detroit to its knees. That would be their weapon of choice. And that when it came time for them to use it, it was going to come suddenly. They were not even going to wait for the demographics to shift. And indeed, they did not. They didn't have to. We've been telling black folks, you better stop it with all the economic excuse making. Negroes thinking that it's cute to have their bank account on E all the time. It's cute to be broke all the time. When white supremacy comes for you, it's going to be showing no mercy. That $1,200 check, that's just a freaking placebo so that they don't have riots in the streets. But please do not think that Uncle Sam's going to be paying your bills for you. I know that's a new concept for Bushika and the bastard baby makers. I know that's a new concept for them because they're used to having some government program paying their bills. And as far as they're concerned, the government better pay their bills or else. Have you not seen the fact that they're already slowly but surely creeping toward making sure the National Guard's going to be on the streets full time? Same thing you saw in Katrina is going to be nationwide. And don't be surprised when you see Eric Prince and his little gang of degenerates, when you see these private military corporations given contracts to secure the streets and secure the neighborhoods, same way they did in New Orleans. Oh, as far as they were concerned, these prior natural disasters, these were just dress rehearsals for for the big show, for what they really intended to do. And you're going to be seeing the same cast of characters. Only this time it ain't going to be just in the streets of New Orleans. For over a decade now, Jason and I have been telling you of the importance of black group economics. And over 40 years, Dr. Claude Anderson's been preaching that sermon. Black people paid him never no mind. We got laughed at in the beginning. You had Negroes still talking that pseudo-religious mumbo-jumbo. There were a lot of black folks who thought that it was cute to try to pretend to be intellectuals for the sake of getting some easy drawers. You stand in front of a crowd of black folks and pretend to be an authority on something, and apparently that gives instant sex appeal to a certain degenerate class, I suppose. But we have been telling you for the longest time that this was not going to last, that you better start focusing on economics because white supremacy was sharpening its knives, and that they were going to be doing some unprecedented off-the-wall stuff We have been telling you that when they decide that they're going to go full hog, when they were going to go in, it was not going to be some matter of, oh, this is going to be some half measure. They were going to go all the way. It was going to be all or nothing. And now, here they're throwing something at you. White supremacy has no problem whatsoever instituting some sort of South Africa option. A lot of black folks are going to be out there going hungry. A lot of black folks are not going to be able to pay their bills no matter when the government claims. Right now they're saying, well, there's going to be some temporary hold-offs on these cutoffs and such. That ain't going to last. States already make it where these utility companies, particularly the electric companies, can't turn you off during the dead of winter. Sometimes they can't turn you off during the dead of summer either. But the thing about it is, those utility companies are going to make it known, hey, you can't have it where we got to cut people a break 365 a year. We got to collect revenue at some point. So as far as giving people checks goes, you can go ahead and get happy about it. There's nothing wrong with that, but please don't make it into something that it's not. And we're going to be finding out which black people have been taking the message of economic empowerment and economic discipline seriously and which ones haven't. You know, I don't like David Simon. He is, as far as I'm concerned, he's a closet white supremacist. He definitely is no friend of black folks. He's just some white guy who thinks that because he was a crime reporter in Baltimore, he's not even really from Baltimore. He's like from the suburbs. He's just this Jewish guy who liked to go slumming, and that just kind of became his thing. But one thing he did do was he was an observer of the drug scene in Baltimore. And he was the guy who created HBO's The Wire, or at least co-created it. And I remember one particular scene. I wasn't a fan of The Wire, so you have to forgive me if I'm not specifically well versed on it. But there was one scene in one particular episode where Stringer Bell, who was played by Idris Elba, he had some drug dealers under him, of course, and he was trying to figure out who the snitch was. He knew that somebody was snitching him out, but he didn't know who. So what he did was he went to his chief drug dealer, the main man who he had on the streets working the other drug dealers. He went to him and said, we're going to find out who this snitch is. He was like, well, how are we going to find out? And he said, well, tell him there's no more work. Cut him off. Tell him ain't no more work. It's all dried up. Ain't nobody working. And the guy was like, well, if I do that, they're going to be coming to me, hitting me up for money. And Stringer Bell was like, that's right. That's exactly what's going to happen. I want you to make a list. Make a list of all the dudes who work for you. And the ones who come to you asking for money because they ain't eating, you can go ahead and mark them off the list because they're not the snitch. But the one who stays eating, the one who doesn't come to you for any money because apparently he seems to have it, that's the one I want to hear about. Now, the thing is, David Simon was the one who wrote that. And what he was doing was, he was not merely giving you an examination of the drug dealer culture of East Baltimore. Keep in mind, David Simon wrote The Wire largely as a critique of capitalism. If you listen to interviews with David Simon, that's what he says. He says that it was a critique of capitalism. David Simon was also giving you an example of how white supremacy looks at black people in general. You see that these Negroes whose bank account is always on E, and they don't never seem to have nothing. Well, those are Negroes you can treat any old kind of way. And you can basically buy them off for pennies or not at all, because these guys are desperate. They're just basically two-legged bovine, and these guys, they're not going to cause you any trouble, because they're dependent on you. But those Negroes who, when you cut off the spigot and they seem to have a little squirreled away and they're not worried about you doing that to them, and those guys seem to be ready for whatever dirt you pull on them. These guys who are not living hand to mouth because they learned that they're under white supremacy domination and that they cannot be dependent on their enemy, those are the Negroes we need to keep an eye on. Because those are the ones who are going to be the biggest source of trouble for us. There's a reason why white supremacy looked and said, we got to get Marcus Garvey out of the country. No, it ain't enough it's not going to be enough to simply put this guy behind bars. He's got to be out of the country. No, we forget about that taxing himself. The IRS ain't gonna be enough for this. We got to get him out the paint totally because he was economically self-sufficient. You weren't gonna bribe him off. That's why I keep talking about dollars with an agenda, an economy with an ideology to back it up. Because Negroes who have a few dollars, but they don't have an underlying ideology that governs their finances, that governs how they use their money and for what, well, they'll be very good for the Nike store. They'll be very good for Best Buy and Amazon, but they won't be good for anything else. That's the lesson that I hope gets learned here, and some of you are going to be learning it very painfully. And because as a people, not enough of us are on code, let this serve as a very painful reminder of what happens when you do not control your economy, when you do not prioritize your economics. That's what's happening here. You don't prioritize your economics, you wind up pockets out. You wind up at the mercy of an enemy who has no mercy. Now, for those of you who might not be in the best place economically, I mean, for the ones who actually deserve our sympathy and support, I'm not sure what to tell you because the economic infrastructure necessary, it's not as strong as it needs to be. We do a lot of thinking and acting on the fly, but this is really not the time for that. I hope for the best for those of you who actually deserve that sympathy. I hope for the best for you. And I hope that this will be a very, very painful reminder to you that this is the cost of being dependent on your enemy. This is what white supremacy is prepared to do to you, and they did it to you suddenly without mercy. Hope this wakes you up to change some of those habits and stop making excuses for your bank account always being on E. Negroes love to spend money on everything except for what it needs to be spent on. And then making excuses that I ain't got it. Please give me a break. If I had a detailed printout of your expenses, if I could actually see whatever prepaid card you were using or your bank card or what have you, if I could actually look and see where those purchases went to, what it was you were spending your money on, you'd be embarrassed as hell, and you should be. You can either make excuses or you can make the changes necessary to ensure that you take control of your life, because if you don't take control of your life, white supremacy will deprive you of that life. For a lot of black folks in the sound of my voice, I got some bad news and some okay news. I don't have any comforting news, but I do have the truth. And the truth is, this is going to be a rather expensive and uncomfortable lesson in the school of experience for a lot of black folks. But the okay news is that if you learn from this, if this counts as the impetus, if this is the spark that makes where you say, you know what, all of these excuses we've been given that we've been thinking have been cute, we got to put that on hold and stop it with the culture of excuse making in the face of annihilation. If this serves as the kick in the behind that gets you to drop the excuses and to pick up the proper discipline, well, this would be a good crisis that did not go to waste.